Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. In her freshman year at Ithaca College from 2000 to 2001, Jenn Hardy experienced a series of disturbing events that were so intense she later questioned how she and her friends emerged from that period alive. What began as unusual sleep disturbances eventually culminated in an encounter with a mysterious entity that would haunt her through reflections for weeks. Before arriving at college, Jenn had never experienced notable sleep issues. However, shortly after beginning her studies at Ithaca College, her nights became more physically and mentally draining than her days. The severity of her sleep disturbances forced her to spend most nights at a friend's off-campus apartment, as sleeping in her dorm room proved impossible. Her friend first noticed that she talked and moved extensively in her sleep, behaviours that quickly escalated in intensity. Soon he began waking her when she struggled to breathe during the night. Violent, recurring nightmares plagued her sleep. The situation deteriorated until a typical night involved Jenn engaging in extended lucid conversations, screaming and pounding walls, rearranging furniture, and even attempting to jump from windows and balconies, all while completely asleep. Her friend, deeply concerned for her safety, insisted she stay at his apartment every night, too worried to let her sleep alone. Early in her second semester, following a particularly terrible night that Jenn described as horrendous, she finally sought counselling for her sleep troubles. Her condition began to improve and she returned to sleeping in her dorm room. The episodes of sleepwalking decreased significantly and her sleep talking diminished considerably. While she attributed much of her sleep activity to extreme stress in her waking life, she also believed the unique energy of the area played a significant role in her disturbed sleep patterns. Ithaca, New York, had a long-standing reputation for supernatural occurrences, particularly in the woods surrounding Ithaca College. The campus was completely encircled by these woods that many considered unusually eerie, with many students at Ithaca College able to recount unexplained experiences there, regardless of their beliefs in the supernatural. Jenn's friend's apartment sat right at the forest's edge, and she frequently walked through the woods at all hours to reach his home. Being naturally receptive to what she called unusual energies, she believed her openness to the mysterious atmosphere of Ithaca contributed to her sleep problems. Only when she began actively protecting herself from what she perceived as these strange influences did her condition improve. One early spring morning, after her sleep patterns had largely normalised, Jenn woke at 4 a.m. to find herself standing in the shower, fully dressed and gripping a phone, shouting, "Hello, hello," into the receiver. She quickly turned off the water and returned to her room. Though she typically remembered her sleepwalking episodes, this particular incident left no trace in her memory. Despite the strangeness of the event, she wasn't particularly shaken, considering it mild compared to her previous semester's experiences. She returned to bed easily and slept through the remainder of the night without incident. The following evening, feeling a little down, she decided to take a solitary walk in the woods, believing that a walk among the dark, wet trees and melting snow would lift her spirits. The dusk was particularly beautiful that day, the sky a deep royal blue, with silver clouds hovering over Lake Cayuga and an orange sunset low on the hills. As the heavy snow melted, new paths emerged from the main trails. Jenn deliberately tried to lose herself in the wooded hills, confident that the relatively small size of the forest would prevent her from becoming truly lost. After an hour of wandering, she noticed the sun's light rapidly fading. With homework waiting to be completed, she attempted to return to campus. Her plan to get lost had succeeded too well. She found herself completely disoriented, unable to determine her location or the direction back to school. She tried to retrace her steps, but the melting snow had rendered her footprints indistinguishable from natural depressions in the snow. With no other option, she picked a direction and walked, reasoning that the limited size of the woods would eventually lead her somewhere familiar. After about 30 minutes of walking, she stumbled upon a wide path that seemed vaguely familiar and decided to follow it downhill. As she rounded a bend in the path, Jenn suddenly stopped in her tracks. Standing approximately 10 feet off the path was an extraordinary tall man wearing a long black coat and black hat. He stood motionless, staring at her. Though she had previous experiences with spirits and considered herself sensitive to their presence, this figure felt different from any apparition she had encountered before. Yet he didn't quite seem entirely human either. After a moment of mutual observation, Jenn cautiously continued along the path, putting herself on the defensive. The figure maintained his silent stare, making no attempt to approach or communicate as she passed. Convinced of his paranormal nature, but receiving no hostile intent, she ignored him and soon found her way back to campus, feeling an overwhelming sense of lightness and relief. After a brief period of procrastination that evening, Jenn sat at her desk to study. When she happened to glance at the mirror to her left, she nearly collapsed from shock. The man from the woods stood reflected at her right shoulder, his height nearly reaching the ceiling. When she whipped her head around to look, the room was empty, but his reflection remained in the mirror, a figure with shoulder-length black hair and dark eyes. Jenn could not tell how old he was or what his race was. As she strangely described it, he seemed to be a composite of every man on the planet. Panicked, Jenn fled to a friend's room down the hall. After her friend helped her calm down and convince herself it had been her imagination, she turned to leave and caught his reflection again in her friend's full-length mirror, still standing at her right shoulder. Returning to her room, Jenn confronted the reflection. "I don't know what you are or what you want," she said, "but you are frightening me, and I wish you would leave. Okay, Oscar?" The name Oscar came to her spontaneously, without thought or reason. She proceeded to cover every reflective surface in her room and attempted to continue her homework. That night, while preparing for bed, Jenn analysed Oscar's peculiarities. Unlike other supernatural encounters where she could see entities directly, Oscar appeared only in reflections. She couldn't sense his presence in the room at all unless she saw his reflection. He had followed her from the woods, and then came the shocking realisation that made her physically ill. The previous night's strange sleepwalking episode, waking up in the shower with a phone, had been connected to him. She had dreamed of talking to Oscar on the phone, though he never spoke. Questions raced through her mind. Was he an ordinary ghost, a guardian, some sort of devil? Unable to determine his nature, she made herself a cup of tea to calm her nerves and went to bed, hoping their confrontation had established some sort of agreement that would make him leave. The next morning proved this hope false. Oscar's reflection appeared in every mirror, window and glass surface Jenn encountered. The bathroom mirror as she brushed her teeth, glass doors, windows. He followed her everywhere. For almost 2 weeks, her sleep problems returned with full force. Horrible recurring nightmares, insomnia, and sleepwalking episodes, including making phone calls while asleep. She consulted various sources but could not determine what kind of entity he was or how to banish him. She tried multiple approaches, talking to him but he would not communicate, ignoring him but he was persistent, trying to send him away but he would not leave. She began avoiding being alone, covered all reflective surfaces she could find, and stayed completely away from the woods. During this period, a friend who had graduated from Ithaca and moved to Boston came to visit. Meeting in the music building one Sunday afternoon, this friend, known for her spiritual intuition and extensive paranormal experiences, seemed to sense Jenn's situation immediately. With a knowing look, she said, "You look like you need a walk in the woods." Despite Jenn's hesitation, watching Oscar's reflection in the glass doors nearby, her friend insisted, "Trust me, you need a walk in the woods." Jenn relented, trusting her friend's judgment and sensing that her friend somehow knew about Oscar. They spent 2 hours walking pleasantly in the woods behind campus, discussing their lives, mutual friends, the weather, and only briefly touching on the wood's persistent eeriness, even on such a beautiful sunny day. After parting ways that evening, Jenn returned to her room. The mirror remained covered. After a moment's hesitation, she stood up swiftly and removed the drape, bracing herself, and found only an empty room reflected back at her. Oscar never appeared again. Jenn never discovered what kind of entity he was, what he wanted, or why he had attached himself to her. Whether he had been malicious or simply existing in his own way, operating without awareness of how he affected the material world, remained a mystery. His appearance, a tall figure in a dark coat and hat, appearing to a lone witness, bears striking resemblance to what paranormal researchers would later term Hat-Man encounters, a subset of the shadow person phenomenon. Although in 2001 such strange accounts were not widely discussed, and Jenn could only describe her experience as uniquely her own. She remained grateful that whatever he was, neither he nor any entity like him ever returned to haunt her reflections again.